Task 3, Introduction to Indigenous Australia. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gubbi Gubbi Cubbi Cubbi people. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. I honour their deep connection to this land, their culture and their continuing contributions to the community. I am grateful for the opportunity to live, work and learn on their country and commit to learning and walking together with respect and understanding. Okay, so I'm talking about the Frontier Wars. So the Frontier Wars was a series of massacres that occurred on Aboriginal people that happened after invasion. The Frontier Wars talk of a prolonged period of 1788 to 1930. It began with the arrival of the First Fleet. These wars arose as the British sought to establish control over the continent, which led to ongoing hostilities with Aboriginal groups resisting colonisation. During this time, there were hundreds of massacres. Colonial governance structures were designed to establish British control rather than coexistence. The early colonial administration, which comprised of military governors and British-appointed magistrates, had no mechanisms for recognising Indigenous sovereignty or law. The British Crown's 1788 claim of sovereignty extended over all of Australia without treaties or negotiation. Colonisation is a long continuing nightmare. Okay, so we speak in a further detail the massacre that occurred at Mile Creek. So the Mile Creek massacre happened in 1838. So what happened was there had been a pastoral settlement in the area for about 1 or 2 years, and there had been incidences occurring at the time of stock going missing. So they really didn't know who they were looking for or who was responsible for this, and they don't have any real information on who's doing it. And I think what appears to be the case was that they were just really looking for revenge and to make a statement against people. They thought that if they inspired terror and hit them hard, that things might settle down. So this occurred on the 10th of June 1938. There are 35 mainly women, children and infants, and they sought shelter near a station. A squatter, John Fleming, leading the party of ex-convicts, found them and led them to a gully where they were hacked to death. They later returned to burn and dismember the bodies to remove the evidence. So this was also the first crime that was punished by the law of the time. This went to trial twice. The first time the men were acquitted and then it was retried, where 7 white men were hanged after being found guilty of the 1938 murder of the 35 Aboriginal women children. So here we've got a memorial that's been erected for Mile Creek. So it was established in 2000, which just goes to show how long it's taking to remember what occurred. And this here, we need to honour the truth of our history if we are to become an integrated and mutually respected community. So the lack of memorialisation of colonial warfare perpetrates the fiction that colonial settlement was a peaceful process and provides institutional ground to cover up the history of dispossession and the genocide carried out in colonising Australia. So here we've got a smoking ceremony of the memorial at Mile Creek. So I'm going to reflect now on my learning. So learning about the Frontier Wars was both eye-opening and emotional for me. I've always been proud of the sacrifices made by those who served to protect our country. But it is difficult to accept that many Indigenous warriors who fought the Frontier Wars are not remembered. Their courage and struggles deserves recognition alongside other veterans. This realisation made me reflect on how history is told and who is acknowledged. It feels important to bring these stories to light, honouring all those who fought bravely on Australian soil, no matter their background. So, the War Memorial Chair, former Howard Government Minister Brendan Nelson, revealed the Memorial's Governing Council had decided that they would have a much broader and much deeper depiction and presentation of the violence committed against Indigenous people. So, before starting these topics at university, I had very limited knowledge of the frontier conflict, if any at all. I previously believed that I understood key events in Australia's history, such as Captain Cook's arrival and the claim of Australia as terra nullius. When I began university 12 months ago, I had a lecturer for my social work course, and she was the first person that really got me thinking about what occurred when an invasion happened. My lecturer completed an acknowledgement of country, but she personalised the acknowledgement. She actually stated that sovereignty was never ceded. And this got my thought process going. And I asked her about this. I was told that the Aboriginal people never agreed for the British to come here and take over the country. The Aboriginal people had a way of looking after the land, although it did not appear that way to the British settlers when they arrived. So, speaking of what we've learned, I found the first few lectures quite confronting. The first lecture introduced the correct terminology. This is something that is very important and can offend Aboriginal people. I made the mistake in my second assignment when I used a term of othering to speak about a photo of Aboriginal children. At this time, I did not realise this, and it shows just how easily you can fall into inappropriate language. It shows respect to use the correct language when speaking. I feel that this part of the course has helped in my daily employment. I often refer back to the terminology guide, which I've taken to work with me and shared with my fellow employees. So studying this course has helped me to understand Aboriginal people more and also the reasons behind the acknowledgement to country. This practice helps to raise awareness about the impacts of colonisation and promotes an inclusive, respectful environment in workplaces, schools, events, or public gatherings. It is a way of non-Indigenous Australians and organisations to show respect, commitment to equity and cultural awareness, as well as to counteract the historical erasure of Indigenous voices and experiences. As the course progressed, I was confronted to realise that I had no real idea of the history of how Australia came to be. The only understanding that I had of this were events that I was taught at school. To be honest, I remember very little of what I was taught, but I do remember it was about Captain Cook. I was taught nothing about Aboriginal Australians and what things were like from their perspective. I've also asked my children about what they learn at school. So my eldest is 20, and I'm sad to say that they have not learned anything different to date. I'm hoping that things have progressed, and my youngest son, who is 8, may learn something different at school. I have taken to telling them the truth and sharing what I'm learning from this course. This week's lecture was about, the video 2, The Frontier Wars and the Great Australian Silence, was very confronting. It is difficult to talk and learn about. This was the first time I had heard about this knowledge and history. I had never thought about the settlers breaking Aboriginal law. For 200 years, there was violence. It was difficult to hear how Australia was settled. The lies that are told in the history of Australia are that invasion was peaceful. They decided to go against how they were told to settle the country. This is one of the worst parts of our history. This is not a proud time, but it needs to be talked about. For so long, this history has been hidden and ignored. I have learnt more in this course about Aboriginal people and the true history of Australia than I have learnt over the course of my life. What I feel is important now is that I share what I have learnt with my immediate family. I am enjoying speaking about what I'm learning with our identified Indigenous worker at work. We were speaking yesterday about the acknowledgement to country and the importance of this. So my position as a student studying a diploma of human and social services working in the community industry, I think it's important to understand Aboriginal people's history. We need to learn more about Aboriginal people and their culture to begin to promote healing among Aboriginal people. This was what was on my mind when I completed the content for week 4. Watching the first video about colonisation and terra nullius, it blew my mind how different the perspective that I had been taught was. I cannot understand how they misrepresent history. The next video about the frontier wars and the Great Australian Silence further educated me to understand what actually occurred at invasion. This video was sad. The massacres that occurred, most of which are not spoken about. But being completely honest, the frontier wars was not something I had ever learnt about. I had no knowledge of the amount of Aboriginal people that had lost their lives. This content has forced me to look at the untruths that I was taught at school. When I spoke to my father about this particular content, he was quite argumentative. He stated that these things had to occur for Australia to be settled. I believe that this shows the level of misrepresentation that has occurred with his generation. My father is 73 years of age. We then went on to speak about the Australian War Memorial and the representation of Aboriginal people. My father believes that it should be separated, that the frontier wars should not be part of the Australian Memorial. After learning what I learned, I completely disagree. But I guess this just shows us how much more learning we need to do. So I believe that the difference will come when we share our learning with our families and extended families. This is how we can change, I guess, the ideas around how Australia was colonised. Thank you for listening. So these are the people, the call to action. These are the people that I need to share what I'm learning with. And here's my reference list. Thank you.